It started as the most ordinary Saturday I'd had in months. Clear sky, light breeze, the smell of charcoal finally burning just right. I had a few friends over, nothing wild, no music blasting, no crowd spilling into the street. Just a backyard barbecue, burgers on the grill, kids tossing a football, neighbors waving as they walked by. I'd lived in this neighborhood for years, paid my dues when required, followed the rules when they actually applied. There was nothing remotely controversial about what I was doing, or so I thought. About 40 minutes in, I noticed her standing at the edge of my driveway. The HOA president, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, arms crossed. She didn't wave back. She didn't smile. She just stood there, watching my backyard like it was an active crime scene. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with an HOA notification email, unauthorized gathering in violation of community standards. No warning. No explanation. Just that line, bolded like a threat. I walked over and asked her calmly what the issue was. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she launched into a speech about community harmony, unapproved events, and how neighbors had supposedly complained. I asked which rule I was breaking. She flipped through her binder, stalled for a second, then said, "Asterisk, I don't need to explain it to you. You're required to comply." Asterisk, that's when I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about control. I reminded her that the HOA rules allowed private gatherings on personal property and that this wasn't a commercial event, a block party, or anything requiring approval. She scoffed and said, "Asterisk, we'll see what the police say." Asterisk, before I could respond, she stepped away and pulled out her phone. Right there. In front of my house. While my grill was still smoking. While my guests stood awkwardly pretending not to listen. 10 minutes later, a patrol car rolled into the cul-de-sac. Lights off. Professional. The officer stepped out, nodded to me, and asked what was going on. Before I could speak, the HOA president rushed over and started talking fast. Complaints, safety concerns, noise issues, unauthorized assembly. The officer listened, then turned to me and asked one simple question. Asterisk, "Sir, is this your property?" Asterisk, I said yes and handed him my ID. He glanced at the barbecue, the kids, the food, the relaxed atmosphere, and then asked her to point out the law being broken. She couldn't. Not a statute. Not a code. Not even an HOA clause with legal authority. Just opinions. The officer turned back to me and said words I'll never forget. Asterisk, "You're not doing anything illegal. Enjoy your barbecue." Asterisk, her face froze. The power she thought she had evaporated in seconds. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't see yet, was that calling the police wasn't the end of this. It was the beginning. The patrol car hadn't even reached the end of the cul-de-sac before the HOA president's confidence completely collapsed. She didn't storm off or shout. She did something worse. She stood there, staring at her phone, scrolling frantically, as if the right rule might suddenly appear if she searched hard enough. My guests tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. Everyone could feel it. Whatever she'd just tried to pull hadn't worked, and people like her never let that go quietly. Less than an hour later, my inbox lit up again. This time it wasn't a warning, it was an official violation notice. According to the email, my barbecue had allegedly violated community safety guidelines, and I was being fined for failure to obtain HOA approval. No citation. No section number. Just a dollar amount and a demand for payment within 10 days. I opened the HOA handbook, the same one they'd sent every homeowner, and read it front to back. There was nothing at all, about needing permission to host friends in your own backyard. That's when I noticed something else. The violation notice was time-stamped after the police had already cleared the situation. She hadn't cited me for an active issue. She'd retaliated. And retaliation, I knew, was something HOAs weren't supposed to do. I took screenshots of everything. The email, the timestamps, the rules, even the officer's business card he'd handed me before leaving. If they wanted to play paperwork games, I was ready. The next morning, another message arrived, this one from the HOA board's general inbox. It said the fine would increase daily if I didn't comply. Comply with what, exactly? There was no ongoing violation. The barbecue was over. The grill was cold. Yet they were treating it like an unresolved offense, stacking penalties on something that no longer existed. It wasn't enforcement, it was intimidation. I replied calmly, attaching excerpts from the HOA rules and asking for the specific provision I'd violated. I also asked for the names of the complaining neighbors and a copy of the complaint itself, both of which I was legally entitled to request. Hours passed. Then the response came, not from the board, but from the HOA president personally. One line. No attachments. The board stands by my decision. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just her acting alone anymore. The board had closed ranks without verifying facts, without consulting the rules, without questioning why the police had refused to act. They were betting I'd get nervous, pay the fine, and move on like everyone else before me. What they didn't know was that I wasn't planning to pay a cent. Because buried in those HOA documents, right where most people never look, was a section about due process. Hearings. Evidence. The homeowner's right to challenge enforcement actions. And if they wanted to escalate this, I was more than happy to let them. By the end of the week, I had formally requested a hearing. The barbecue that wasn't allowed had just become the case that forced the HOA to explain itself, on the record. And that's when the real cracks started to show. The hearing notice arrived 3 days later, slid under my door like something urgent and confidential. No greeting. No explanation. Just a date, a time, and a warning that failure to appear would result in automatic enforcement. I smiled when I read that. Automatic enforcement only works when the enforcement itself is legitimate. And by now, I already knew theirs wasn't. I spent the next few nights doing something most homeowners never bother with, reading every HOA document line by line. The bylaws. The enforcement policy. The fine schedule. The amendments. And right there, in black and white, was the clause that changed everything. **HOA rules could not override municipal law, nor could they regulate non-commercial gatherings on private property without a demonstrated safety violation. That wasn't just helpful. It was devastating to their case. I organized everything into a folder. The violation email, the fine notice, the daily penalty threat, and most importantly, the police officer's card and incident number. Then I requested the HOA's records related to my violation, including the original complaint, internal emails, and the rule citation they were relying on. Legally, they had to respond. What they sent back told a story they hadn't meant to tell. There was no complaint from a neighbor. Not one. The only record was an email from the HOA president to the board that read, *observed unauthorized gathering. Police contacted. No action taken. That was it. No safety issue. No noise report. No emergency. Just her observation, and her decision to escalate it to law enforcement. She hadn't enforced a rule. She'd invented a problem. The hearing itself was held in the HOA clubhouse, a room designed to feel official but functionally powerless. 3 board members sat at the table. The president sat in the middle, arms crossed, already annoyed. She opened by repeating the same vague claims from the emails, carefully avoiding any mention of the police. When it was my turn, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I handed them the documents. One board member started flipping through the pages, slower and slower as it sank in. Another cleared his throat and asked where the rule citation was. The president tried to interrupt, but I calmly pointed to the bylaw section that guaranteed my right to speak without interruption. That moment, that pause, was the first time I saw doubt on their faces. Then I asked one simple question, can the board explain why a fine was issued after the police determined no violation occurred? Silence. Actual silence. The kind that fills a room and makes people uncomfortable. Finally, someone muttered that the board would need to review the matter further. They didn't rule that night. They couldn't. Too many inconsistencies had surfaced, too many questions they hadn't prepared for. The president looked furious, but she also looked cornered. And when people like that lose control, they tend to make mistakes. What I didn't know yet was that the biggest mistake was still coming, one that would pull the entire board into the spotlight. The next board meeting was supposed to be routine. Budget updates. Landscaping complaints. 5 minutes of public comments before everyone went home. That's how these things usually go. But when I walked into the clubhouse that night, I knew this one was going to be different. The room was packed. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before were sitting along the walls, whispering, watching. Word had spread. The HOA president opened the meeting stiffly, her voice clipped, eyes fixed on the agenda like it might save her. She announced that enforcement matters were internal and wouldn't be discussed publicly. That might have worked, except I wasn't there to discuss enforcement. I was there to speak during public comment, something every homeowner was entitled to do. When my name was called, I stood and calmly laid out the timeline. The barbecue. The on-site confrontation. The police call. The officer's decision. The fine issued afterward. I didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. I didn't use emotional language. I just stated facts and held up the documents so everyone could see them. You could feel the room shift. People weren't nodding in agreement yet, but they were listening. That's when the president snapped. She interrupted me, raised her voice, and claimed I was misrepresenting events. Then, without realizing what she was doing, she said the words that changed everything. I called the police because I felt the situation could get out of hand. The room went quiet. A few neighbors exchanged looks. Because suddenly, this wasn't about noise or rules. It was about fear-based escalation with no evidence. One of the board members leaned toward the microphone and asked her if there had been any report of violence, threats, or safety hazards. She hesitated. Too long. Then she said no, but added that she didn't need proof to act. That answer landed like a brick. People shifted in their seats. Someone in the back actually laughed, then quickly stopped when they realized how serious this was. Another homeowner stood up and asked if the board routinely called police on residents without cause. The president tried to shut the question down, but it was too late. Others started raising their hands. A woman too rose up, said her son had been fined for loitering in front of their own home. A man near the door mentioned a warning he'd received for hosting a birthday party. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The board called a recess. 10 minutes turned into 20. When they came back, the tone had changed completely. The president no longer looked in control. She looked defensive. One board member announced that the barbecue violation was under review and that all fines related to it were temporarily suspended. That word, temporarily, was meant to save face. But everyone in the room knew what it really meant. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors stopped me in the hallway. Some thanked me. Some asked how I'd found the information. One even said, I thought it was just me. That's when it hit me. This was never about my barbecue. It was about a board that had been operating unchecked for far too long. And now, they'd been exposed in public. But the fallout was only beginning. The official email came 2 days after the board meeting. Not from the HOA president, but from the association's legal counsel. The subject line was carefully neutral, notice of enforcement withdrawal. The body was short, formal, and painfully clear. All fines related to the barbecue were rescinded. The violation was voided. The matter was considered closed. No apology. No explanation. Just a quiet retreat. But what they didn't understand was that once something like this goes public, it never really closes. Within a week, a second email followed. This one went to every homeowner in the community. It announced that the HOA would be conducting an internal review of enforcement procedures and temporarily suspending discretionary fines. That phrase, internal review was damage control. The board wasn't fixing a system. They were protecting themselves. Then the real shock hit. The HOA president resigned. No announcement. No farewell message. Just a line buried at the bottom of the next agenda, board position vacancy. Neighbors noticed immediately. People talked. Someone confirmed she'd stepped down for personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. Calling the police over a lawful barbecue, issuing retaliatory fines, and admitting it in a public meeting had crossed a line she couldn't walk back. A month later, new board members were elected. People who had never attended a meeting before suddenly cared. Policies were rewritten. Enforcement guidelines were clarified. And one specific change stood out above all others. No board member was permitted to contact law enforcement over HOA matters without clear legal cause. That rule had my barbecue written all over it. The officer who'd responded that day actually stopped by weeks later while patrolling the area. He recognized me, smiled, and said, "Heard things got sorted out." I told him they had. And they had, because authority only works when people don't challenge it. What started as burgers on a grill turned into something bigger. It reminded an entire neighborhood that HOAs don't make laws, fear isn't enforcement, and power without accountability never lasts. And every time I fire up that grill now, neighbors wave. Not because they're afraid, but because they know someone finally pushed back.